And I want to officially welcome all of you to the start of a brand new year of the program that we have been offering through the Justice Coalition of Religious for several years now. And I will begin by saying that my name is Teresa Blumenstein, and I am the coordinator of the Justice Coalition of Religious, or JCoR for short. And we are a group of 24 organizations that have an accreditation at the United Nations to represent the many experiences and insights and wisdom from Catholic congregations of religious sisters, brothers, priests, as well as their many, many lay partners in mission. And I will say a lot more about that later in our session today, but first wanted to give a brief introduction of the group and myself before we dive in. So first, let's take a look at what we will be covering in our session today. We will be talking more about what the Justice Coalition of Religious is. We will also talk about what the Sustainable Development Goals are, as you will come to know, if you do not already, that this framework will be very central to this entire program. And then we will also talk a bit more about the role of religious congregations within the UN system and the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. But before we do all that, we will begin our program today, as we will for each session, with a brief moment to come together and to settle ourselves in prayer as a spiritual community. So let us pray. Gracious God, let our hearts be settled in you today as we celebrate the meeting of our many different paths and callings. Let us rejoice in the opportunity to become better acquainted with new partners and friends from many corners of creation. Let us be awake to your presence within each of them. We are grateful for this new opportunity to serve you as the source and the substance of our common mission and identity. We are humbled to be entrusted with the service and promotion of social, economic, and environmental justice in our local communities and in our global community. Guide us in our efforts to collaborate and change systems so that we may more effectively sow your generous light and love where they are needed most. Amen. As we proceed today, I will welcome anyone who has not already introduced yourself in the chat box. I encourage you to do that at some point during the session, sharing your name, your congregation or the organization, and the country from which you are joining. So our first topic for today, as promised, is to introduce the Justice Coalition of Religious, which is organizing and facilitating this program over the course of the next 8 months. And as I mentioned earlier, we're a group of 24 NGOs. We have UN accreditation. All of us have representatives who represent these congregations at UN headquarters in New York. And some also have representatives at other UN offices, such as those in Geneva in Switzerland or Nairobi, Kenya. And something else we all have in common is that we share a commitment to improving the well-being of people who are living in poverty and the well-being of the natural environment. As a group, we have a geographic presence in over 100 countries. And these are the organizations who form JCoR. If you'd like, you can take a moment to see where you personally may fit into this list. And I will note that there are several organizations here that are kind of a collective or a coalition of several or many congregations. So, for example, the Dominican Leadership Conference represents dozens of congregations, and others like Unanima and Vivat International do the same. And the other important thing to note is that even if your congregation is not a part of any of these groups, we are very happy to have you here with us, as it is part of the vision of JCoR to bring as much wisdom and experience from the global community of religious as possible into the conversations and the decision-making that happen at the level of the United Nations. So, of course, the primary thing that binds us together is a shared sense of mission. And in our case, the specific mission of JCoR is to facilitate collaboration among our members and partners, those from all Catholic religious congregations, including those who are working at the grassroots, as well as those who work at the United Nations, in order to do two things. The first is to strengthen one another's capacity for advocacy. And the second is to advocate collectively, both in the promotion of social, economic, and environmental justice and peace. And we seek to do that at many levels: the international, the regional, and the national. And I want to note that first point there, that we say we strengthen one another's capacity for advocacy, because while the training that you have all joined today is coming from JCoR's operations that are out of New York and adjacent to the United Nations, we recognize that this program, as so much of our work, will be an opportunity for mutual learning. That in order for us who are at the UN to be strong advocates for human rights and for the planet, that we need to be continuous, ongoing students of all of the experiences and insights that our members are steeped in every day all over the world. So we come together through JCoR, not for those at the UN to teach those everywhere else, but to strengthen one another's capacity for advocacy. And I want to take a moment before we proceed further to talk about the word advocacy, because it is a word that has proven very challenging to translate across different languages. And so I want to be sure we have a common understanding of what we mean when I use the word advocacy in English, or incidencia política, or plaidoyer. And so when we use this word, what we mean is quite a variety of things. It's a really big tent or a broad umbrella. Advocacy can be many different kinds of public or private action that promote movement toward justice. And this could be social justice, economic justice, or environmental justice, but that promote justice in our systems and our structures of our society. And we will get into later on some more specific examples of the kinds of activities that this includes. But to give you a few to begin with, advocacy includes speaking to or informing a community or their political leaders. It includes things like writing letters or statements. It includes public actions like joining or organizing a rally or a march or a demonstration, all with the purpose of addressing some kind of structural injustice. So a few more important things to say about JCoR right at the beginning is to say there are several ways to be connected with us beyond your participation in this program. One is that for those of you who do have a representative for your congregation at the UN, you can always contact that representative directly. And we have a listing for you in which you can easily find all of your representatives. And I will note that all of these slides will also be shared with you by email after the session today, and they will also be shared in multiple languages. So you will have access to all of the links that you see on the screen and all of the written information as well. Another door that's open to you to connect with us, and this is true whether you personally have a representative through your congregation or not, is that you can always contact us at JCoR's office, which is in New York, just across the street from the UN itself. And while I've already introduced myself, I want to take a moment to pause and allow our associate coordinator, Katie Garrison, to also introduce herself, as she is here with us right now too. So, Katie, would you like to greet the people for a moment?
Thank you so much, Teresa. I've been doing my best to connect with everyone in the chat box so far. It is absolutely wonderful to see how many of you have joined us today from all around the world. As Teresa said, my name is Katie Garrison, and I am the Associate Coordinator for the Justice Coalition of Religious. So I have the privilege of working with Teresa in our New York office. And I also manage and coordinate a lot of our communications. So from our social media to our monthly bulletins and updates about the work coming out of our office and our different regions, and also some of the educational resources that we provide that I am sure you will learn about later in this program. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you.
Thank you, Katie. So if any of you have ever received a newsletter or a guide to a UN conference from the JCoR office, now you have met the woman behind those wonderful, informative works of art, as they're always quite attractive, in addition to being very informative. Another important place that I want to point out to you is that we do maintain a website that is full of up-to-date information and resources that go far beyond all of the content that we will cover in our program together. And that website is JCOR2030.org. JCOR2030.org. And we also have several social media pages. Although, like many of you, I expect we are using those less these days. And we definitely recommend our website as the best source and the most comprehensive of all the information that we have to offer. So now we get into a bit more of the interesting piece of today's session, which is to begin to look at why JCoR exists, why and how religious congregations engage with a system like the United Nations system when it seems at its surface or on its face to perhaps be operating on a separate plane, the political as separate from our domain, which is the spiritual. So first, let's talk about why we engage with the UN system as religious congregations. And like so many things, the root of this participation lies within Catholic social teaching. And I'm sure most or all of us on this call are familiar with some version of these principles or pillars or themes that we see across Catholic social teaching. They call us to both awareness and action on many different fronts. Our teaching calls us to be aware of the dignity of work and the rights of workers, as well as the rights of all people and the responsibilities that we have to defend and protect one another's rights. It calls us to a special concern for the poor. It calls us to care for creation, for the natural world, and to be good neighbors to all of the other species who are part of this world. It calls us to participate, to be social, as is in our nature, through the ways that we form family and the ways we form community. It calls us to uphold and recognize human dignity. in all circumstances. And it also calls us to genuine and deep solidarity, to recognize the suffering of one is the suffering of all. The well-being of one is the well-being of all. And to be restless until everyone is able to live in full dignity. And from this starting point, I want to invite you to take a few moments to look at a few important sections of what is truly one of the most important documents that has ever been produced by the United Nations, which is essentially the first document ever produced by the United Nations. And that's the UN Charter itself, the mission statement of the United Nations. And I think as we examine, you will see some interesting connections between the purpose of the UN and the social teaching that guides us and our own sense of mission. The Charter says, "We, the peoples of the United Nations." And I pause there to underline peoples. I want to note for us all that right from the beginning, the UN recognizes itself as a global community of the people. It is not primarily an organization of political leaders. It is not an organization of corporate or business leaders. It is meant to be a meeting place and a forum for all the peoples of the world. And so it goes on to say, "We the peoples seek to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in human rights and in the dignity and worth of the human person, equal rights of men and women, of nations large and small, to establish justice, to promote social progress and better standards of life." To live together in peace as good neighbors, to maintain international peace, to ensure that armed force shall not be used, to promote the economic and social advancement of all peoples. We know the UN is presented many different ways from different news sources in different parts of the world, but that at its core is the purpose of the United Nations as a system. And we see that throughout its history of now more than 80 years, that it has developed many strong frameworks that help to elaborate these ideas and make them concrete so that we can actually deliver them, we can realize them in our world. And one of the most important frameworks that has emerged from this effort of the UN is the human rights framework. And it has many parts, but I've highlighted a few here that I think will speak to many of the ministries and charisms of those of us who are gathered here today. Within this framework, we have a universal declaration of human rights. We have defined civil and political rights economic, social, and cultural rights. We have sought to establish consensus and systems for accountability to eliminate discrimination against women and to eliminate torture and other cruel or inhumane treatment. We've established the rights of migrant workers and their families, rights of persons with disabilities, rights of children, and a system of accountability to eliminate racial discrimination. One way that we might view this framework is a way of putting the principles of Catholic social teaching into a very practical and very secular language. Another framework that has emerged from the United Nations and significantly reflects the ministries and charisms of the global community of religious is this framework that we call the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs. And for those who are not already familiar with this framework, it is the agenda for the entire UN system, which was adopted in the year 2015 and will continue to be the central agenda and framework through the year 2030. And while we won't get into deep detail on each of these goals today, you can see as we move through the different language versions of them that they touch on many of the key concerns that are highlighted in our own social teaching and that we seek to address through our ministries. The goals are things like ending poverty and hunger, ensuring good health, education, drinking water, decent work for all people, ensuring a responsible relationship between human beings and the rest of the living world through how we respect all of our ecosystems. The goals speak of establishing all kinds of social equality and of building systems of justice and institutions that serve peace. So one way of looking at this framework is something like a secular roadmap to the city or the kingdom of God. It's not necessarily the language that we would use in our spiritual communities, but it is a language that allows us to partner and to work alongside people of all different faith backgrounds or no particular background at all, but to come together as neighbors, as brothers and sisters in the world, to pursue this common dream that we share as people of goodwill. And there are a few other connections between this theoretically political entity and our spiritual focus and approach. And I first want to share a few statements that have come from leaders within the UN system, leaders who have a role that appears to be fairly political, but who have highlighted the spiritual dimensions of their work. A former UN Deputy Secretary General, Jan Eliasson, said, "It's important to realize that there is an element of spirituality that is needed in what we do. We must stop the trend of dividing humanity to us and them. The most important word in the world is together." Another statement, this one from Dr. Aza Karam, who is formerly a senior advisor of the UN Population Fund and who has gone on to be a leader in interfaith organizations and movements of many kinds, pointed out that the United Nations and its agencies deal with a comprehensive range of issues affecting global communities. And religion often plays a powerful, complementary, moral, social, economic, and political role for disenfranchised communities. Religious social service networks preceded the UN and governmental entities, and they reach more people and are more deeply entrenched than any other organization. So as Dr. Karam and her colleague, Dr. Weiner, are stating here, the work of the United Nations really requires partnership and collaboration with religious leaders and communities. And we also highlight a quotation from the current UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who actually wrote a foreword to a reading guide that was published for Pope Francis's Laudato Si. And in this foreword, the Secretary General said, "The spiritual dimensions of the work of the United Nations tend to be overlooked and underappreciated. But the tenets that are set out in the Charter, peace, justice, equality, the dignity and worth of the human person, these tenets echo the teaching of the world's religious traditions, and they summon us all to reduce human suffering. As we reflect on Laudato Si, the state of our common home is broken. And this is an epic policy test for us. But ultimately, this is a moral test." So all of these together, a strong endorsement from those within the UN system who occupy ostensibly political roles, are emphasizing that their work is political, but beneath that politics, their work is spiritual. And then on the flip side, or the opposite approach, I also want to highlight that there have been many important moments in which our spiritual leaders have also highlighted the important role of politics for those who seek to create the better world that our spirituality directs us to and makes us love. And so, for example, from Pope Francis's Evangelii Gaudium, we hear, "Politics remains a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good. Openness to the transcendent," which is one of the things that we can bring into any conversation as spiritual leaders, Openness to the transcendent can bring about a new political and economic mindset. And this would help to break down the wall between the economy as it is now and the common good of society. A second example of spiritual leaders highlighting political action is from Pope Benedict in Deus Caritas Est, in which he said, "The Church cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the fight for justice. She has to play her part to reawaken the spiritual energy without which justice cannot prevail and prosper." I'll say that part again. Without spiritual energy, justice cannot prevail and prosper. Efforts to bring about openness of mind and will to the demands of the common good is something which concerns the Church deeply. And finally, one more from Pope Francis in Laudato Si. We are reminded that not only is the political spiritual and the spiritual political, but that in fact, our spiritual teachings are integral to all dimensions of development, which are considered within the purview of the United Nations. He says, "We're faced not with two separate crises, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis, which is both social and environmental. Strategies for a solution demand an integral approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and at the same time, protecting nature." And we will have an opportunity to pause and ask and answer questions in a moment. But before we do, I wanted to offer you a moment for brief reflection. I invite you to take another look at all of the Sustainable Development Goals and ask yourself, do you see your ministry here? Do you see the charism of your congregation here? Maybe it is in many goals. Maybe it's in one or two in particular. But examine the picture that is painted by these goals, the world that is envisioned by these goals. If we were to achieve them for all people, do you see your ministry here? And do you see the charism of your congregation here? So we'll just take maybe 2-3 minutes of quiet, and I will move through the different language versions of this image. And I will invite you to either just write down for yourself, or if you can, in the chat box, to share which goals seem to be the most closely connected to your ministry or to the charism of your congregation. Thanks to those who have started sharing their connections with the SDGs in the chat box. Seeing connections to justice, peace, and strong institutions, climate action, equity, education. Definitely a lot of connections in the first 6 goals, many ministries addressing poverty, hunger, health, education, water. And several addressing different kinds of inequalities. So before I proceed to talk about sort of some of the practical aspects of how we engage with the United Nations, I want to pause and offer the opportunity if anyone has any questions about anything that has been shared thus far, or perhaps if there's something that you would like to share um, in reaction or response to the SDG framework, the human rights framework, any reaction that you might like to share with the group before we proceed. And if you would like to speak, please raise your hand, which you can do by using the reaction button, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. I think it usually has a heart icon. And then you will see the option to raise your hand. Or if you have your camera on, the good old-fashioned raising of your actual hand also works very well too. And if neither of those are an option for you, feel free to unmute and just announce yourself to get my attention. Yes, please, Gabriela. Gabriela Lado. Thank you, Gabriela. Yes, we do not live in a world of silos. It is often how we think, how we organize ourselves, but in fact, this world is made of interconnection. Yes, Michael Mary Nolan, I see your hand. That's a good idea. I should. It's so hard to choose because heaven knows that the UN is constantly producing documents and many of them are excellent. But you're right. That is an important one. I think we can find a space for that. Thank you. Yes, Miriam. Miriam and Gole. Thank you, Miriam. Happy you are here. Joseph Bokako. And by the way, if I ever pronounce anyone's name incorrectly, please teach me.
Good, good morning. My name was right, and I am very happy with that. It was okay. I am in Kinshasa, Congo, and we are very happy because the development goals, we can find our charism in many of them. For example, zero hunger or others, that it's really important in our country, or gender equality, and also with in this present moment our country is suffering from war amongst brothers, so we are very happy of this presentation that shows the role of the church in this world and in the midst of these problems that we face in our country. And as Africans and as global community, it helps us a lot, and it is an opportunity for us to see all that. So thank you for this session.
Merci, bienvenue, Joseph. Yes, Linda.
Merci. Merci de me passer la parole.
Thank you.
Je trouve aussi l'enseignement très pertinent et
I also think that is very appropriate, and it encourages us.
Quand j'ai
I
vu le
cannot
lien
hear very well, but
de notre charisme et les
because I can see the relation with our charisma, I will tell her to talk.
on travaille pour combattre la pauvreté, la faim,
We
éveiller
work in several goals,
et c'est encourageant de voir que voilà, on
and
travaille sur notre
it's encouraging for us. It's very encouraging for us to see that our work is in the goals.
Il n'y a pas vraiment pas la possibilité d'avoir un développement durable sans
We cannot have a development that
un rôle important à jouer
without
la croissance, le développement dans
the
notre monde.
without seeing the importance of these different goals.
Hein,
On a,
donc,
it's I
je
cannot
voterai
hear very well, but that's
aller avec courage, sachant que ça correspond à notre charisme, à
It's
notre
really
vocation.
important to see that it's according to our charism. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Jean-Paul Malou. Jean-Paul, are you able to unmute so we can hear you? Oui.
Yeah. What I wanted to say, it was the relation between spirituality and politics in the church history. The Pope John Paul II began to talk about this relation as, because without that a bird cannot fly, and the development goals look for the well-being of men and women. And we realized that these texts are so good to read, but the question is, as Joseph said, we are in a country where we talk about war and some humanitarian help. But in that help, instead of doing that only for the sake of human beings, sometimes we are destroying at the same time the nature, the ecology, because where you have war and not peace, also the nature suffers. So Laudato Si talked about protecting nature, and the first nature to be protected is the human being, that is the guardian, the nature's guardian. So these topics that we are studying in this session put some questions to me with regard to the relation between spirituality and politics, because many times Christians are politicians. And the Christians also live spirituality, practice spirituality. So I think this question calls us to reflect: if Christians are politicians, why we have so many wars? Why we have so many sufferings? Why we are still having hunger? And so mine are only questions, but for the good of our reflection, for the sake of our reflection. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Paul. That is an important question. It's a good challenge for all of us, especially those of us who are educators, who produce some of the most powerful political leaders in some places. And then we wonder, why did they leave their values at the door when they walked into the government building? What happened? And so many times we see that in the mind, we separate, this is my spiritual part and this is my political part, and we do not use the lessons from one when we are acting in the other space. And so part of our work is always to encourage that our spirituality and the values that we nourish through our spirituality, that this should appear. In fact, it should be quite visible in all that we do, in all spaces, in all realms of our life. And, it's a common challenge within the United Nations system. Often people will refer to pillars of development, and they mean the social, the economic, the environmental. And I really dislike this image, this way of understanding development, because pillars, like on a building, they stand quite separate from one another. There's space in between, they never touch, and that's what makes the building strong. And I think that's the wrong image for us, because if we understand our place properly, as you said, humanity is within nature. We are not above it, we are not outside of it. And so if we think of human development or social development, we're talking about something that exists inside the well-being of our environment as a whole. It's very well within. It's not separate. It's not alongside. And economy, we talk about economic development. That is kind of the way that we interact as humans with the rest of the natural world. It's a way for us to share and move resources, but it's also not separate from the environment or from our relations with one another. So it's very important to ask these questions, and I'm so happy that you are here to explore them with us. Was there another
Thank you,
hand
he said.
up briefly? I think I saw one, but then it went away. Okay. Great. Then we will proceed to our next topic or question of the day, which is that now that we have talked about why we engage with the UN system as a faith community and as members and partners of religious congregations, the next thing that we will speak about is more the practical details of how we engage with the UN system. So here is a very, very simplified little map of the complicated system that we call the United Nations. And within this complicated structure, there is a process for accreditation of non-governmental organizations. And while I know that typically congregations do not think of ourselves as NGOs, within the UN system, that is the heading or the category under which we reside. Essentially, if you are either government or you are NGO, and there really are no other categories for those who are participating. So we are understood as NGOs in the UN system, and I've tried to illustrate kind of where we fit in with the system, which is to say we get our accreditation, most of us, through a green bubble over here, the Economic and Social Council. But it is really our role, because we are not within the system, we are not part of the United Nations. It is our role to be eyes on as much of this entire system as we can. And there are about 30 NGOs that have UN accreditation that represent either one or many congregations of Catholic religious. And as a group, those 30 organizations represent about 200 Catholic religious congregations. And what it means to be accredited is that we as NGOs are able to participate in certain UN proceedings in certain ways. So some of the things that we are able to do are to make oral statements, so to speak during certain UN meetings and conferences. We're able to submit written statements. We can seek meetings with diplomats or representatives of different governments. We can participate in many UN conferences. We are able to sponsor events either inside UN headquarters or in some of the meeting spaces that are very near to the UN. And those events would be opportunities for us to bring members of our own congregations or the communities with whom we work in order to bring some of their personal experience and insight into the conversation and to share it with others who are gathered at the UN. We're also able to make both formal and informal recommendations when a new agreement or document or declaration of some kind is being negotiated. There are often opportunities for us to submit our own recommendations about language or ideas that should be included in those documents. And another very important part of our role is that we're able to submit our own insights and perspectives in the form of reports or comments on the progress of various nations in delivering on human rights and on sustainable development. And as you can imagine, a lot of the time that means submitting reports on where there is a lack of progress, where rights are not being respected or protected or fulfilled by government. So in some way, we are keeping close eyes on the UN system itself, but we're also sharing what we have learned by keeping a close eye on so many communities around the world. And especially, in our case, all of those various different kinds of marginalized or vulnerable communities that we are called to serve. At this point in time, there have been representatives of religious congregations at the UN for several decades. And in that time, the work of those religious representatives has established a certain reputation and established a certain quality of voice that religious NGOs bring into the UN conversation. Your voice is known to be one that is expert because you are constantly providing insights from all of your work, all of your ministries to the most vulnerable and the most excluded around the world. Your voice is also recognized as one that's impartial because you represent communities that span so many different nations and don't necessarily have one specific national identity. So you're not biased for one country or one region over another. Your voice is also recognized as being quite credible because, of course, by the way that you live your lives, practice your values, live out your care for human dignity and for Earth, through your lives of intentionality and dedicated service, your voice is understood to be credible and carry a lot of weight. Your sincerity is understood. Your voice is also one that has been quite consistent. Your representatives maintain positions that are based on the constitutions of your congregations and the principles of our faith, which are, of course, older than the United Nations itself, and even older than many of the nations that are part of the UN. And this brings a very important continuity and stability to the global conversations that are happening among governments here. Because as we all know and have seen, the position that a government may take can change very wildly from one year to the next, depending on who is in leadership at that time. And when that happens, there is always a threat that is presented to the progress that we have made as a global community in establishing rights and establishing consensus about what is right and what is wrong. And so in those moments when governments swing wildly from being supportive of rights to maybe holding them back or tearing them down, it's important to have a presence in the room that stays consistent and is always pushing in favor of rights, justice, and peace. And we have been part of that voice in the United Nations system. And a final important quality of the religious voice in the UN is that your voice is very collaborative. Your representatives at the UN have consistently been speaking and working through coalitions and committees for the whole time that they have been present here. And by working in that way, they have not only had a more impactful, effective voice when communicating with governments, but they've also presented quite a convincing argument for collaboration itself. They have modeled for governments exactly what they want to see from the behavior of the governments themselves, which is that they prioritize common goals and common good and be less concerned with individual glory or achievement or control. And this is a very powerful quality to have in your voice in a conversation about justice and peace. So just to give you a taste, these are some of the committees or coalitions that are very well attended by religious NGO representatives at the UN. And in many of these committees, you will not only find that the membership is significantly comprised of religious representatives, but you will often find with many of these committees that the leaders of the committees are representatives of religious NGOs. And so just to read them out, especially for those who may not be speakers or readers of English, the committees that are most well attended to by our representatives are committees that address the issues of trafficking in persons, financial development, meaning the sources and uses of funds for development, a group to end homelessness, a group on social equalities, a group dedicated to the rights of migrants, a group on the rights of Indigenous peoples, a working group dedicated to mining, which is concerned with the work of all extractive industries, as well as the human right to water. A committee on the status of women, and a working group on the rights of girls. So both of which address different aspects of gender equality. And we are also part of a committee of religious NGOs, which brings together NGOs representing different faith traditions and different faith backgrounds. There are many more committees, but these are the ones where you see the strongest representation from religious NGOs. I want to pause again there because I know I just put a lot of information into a few minutes. So I just want to pause again to see if there are any questions or need for clarification about how we engage with the UN system. Okay, great. You are all such strong listeners. You have absorbed it all quickly. And we will proceed. Okay, so now I have shared a little bit kind of looking back at the history of religious representation at the UN and how we have been working. And so now I want to say a little more about what brings us together in collaboration as JCoR and what also brings all of us together for this program specifically. So something that is motivating us right now is, as people of the New Testament, we are familiar with the concept and the exercise of always trying to read the signs of the times, to always ensure that we bring new wineskins when we need to hold new wine. And so a couple of the signs of the times that we can see now are really something that are calling us to act in coalition. One of those signs is that we see a trend, not in every single congregation, but in the big picture of religious life. We see a trend of smaller numbers of vocations to religious life. And that requires us to take action in a few different ways. One is that we need to adopt more creative approaches to ministry. Approaches that allow us to retain the wisdoms and the unique charisms of our individual congregations, but at the same time, draw on the strength of our great numbers, both religious communities themselves, as well as our many, many, many lay partners who all hold a part of one same mission in common, who have a common sense of mission, and who all have gifts to offer. This trend also calls us to confront some difficult questions about structural justice that lie beneath the question or the challenge of our own congregation's sustainability. When we consider that any given congregation may not be around forever or may not be able to remain in a specific place forever, we need to ask these difficult questions. On the day that we can no longer provide a particular charitable ministry, how will the dignity of those we serve be upheld? When we're not here, or if we are not here, how will the dignity of those we serve be upheld? What system will ensure that this community's rights are protected and fulfilled? Will they be able to live in dignity in our absence? Another important sign of the times that calls us to coalition is that we see that political spaces are becoming more closed and less receptive to the voices of civil society, which is another way of saying that we are seeing many governments become less democratic, or in the words of our church, they are becoming less synodal. In these circumstances, we see the value of speaking with an organized and unified voice, because speaking in this way allows us to use the spaces, the opportunities that are still available to us, and to protect them, to try to keep them from becoming even smaller, to try to preserve the opportunities for the people of any given nation to have a say in the decisions that are being made by their government. Another important sign of our times from the UN level was the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. These were adopted in the year 2015, and they were adopted unanimously, which is to say that every government on Earth agreed that this would be a priority and that they would make every effort to achieve these goals by the year 2030. With this agenda, all governments agreed on a common vision to alleviate both human and environmental suffering. And we who were at the UN at that time, we saw that as a real opportunity and a call to action for our whole religious community around the world. Because these goals are truly beautiful. As I mentioned earlier, they are an excellent, if not perfect, reflection of our very own vision for the kingdom of God, the city of God, a world in which all people can live in dignity and earth can sustain itself without human interference. And so the ideas of this agenda were excellent and something that we very much wanted to see become real. But we are all aware that it's very easy to put beautiful words on paper, and it is very hard to make them real. And we were aware that there was a very good chance that unless a great number of people around the world were aware of this agenda and were engaged in ensuring that it be fulfilled, we were aware that there was a very good chance that these goals would not be achieved and that those who benefited from them would be a very small segment of the population. And that the people that we serve, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, that they would be left behind and would not enjoy the benefits of work being done toward these goals. And so we saw this agenda as a call to action for our whole global community to become involved not only in implementing these goals, as so many of us already have been for centuries in some cases, but also to be carefully monitoring progress toward the achievement of these goals within every nation in which we are present, to ensure that they were being implemented not only for a few, but for all, and that must include the poorest and the most vulnerable among us. And we recognize that because our communities have been selectively going to the most remote, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized communities for so many years, that we were already very well positioned to be monitoring this progress, to be offering insights about how government itself could deliver on these promises, and to hold them accountable in any place where they were not delivering on these promises. And so that call to action brings us to what the purpose of this program is, which is to be part of a call to monitor progress toward the SDGs. And so let me give our first introduction to the specific content of this 8-month course, this 8-month journey that we will be on together. As I'm sure you read before registering today, this is a training program for a UN conference with a silly long name. And so mostly we will not use its full name. We will abbreviate it to a few letters. But just so everyone knows, the full name of this conference is the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. But for most of the time we are together, we will simply refer to this conference as the HLPF, which is the acronym in English. But for those who are participating in Portuguese or Spanish, it would be the FPAN, or those in participating in French, the FPHN. And this conference is the designated mechanism or process through which the nations of the world monitor progress toward the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the perhaps center or heart of that process is an annual global meeting, which happens in New York each July. And at this meeting, nations are invited to offer a presentation on their own national progress toward achieving the SDGs. And this conference is also an opportunity for nations to propose how they could make changes or improvements to the way that they are implementing the goals in order to accelerate their progress toward achieving them. And so, as a global community that is dedicated to the poor, the oppressed, and the earth, we also are called to engage in this conference, this HLPF. And as part of our engagement, it will be to simply watch and listen to know how our political leaders are presenting the story of our national realities. But there's another way in which we can participate as well, which is to bring our own stories, our own observations, and our own concerns, which we draw from our own experiences in service to the marginalized. And we bring those into this global conversation so that they are not forgotten or left out of the report. So the last thing we will do today is talk about kind of the logistical details for the rest of our program, which will continue from now through August. But before I get into those details, I want to pause one more time and just ask if anyone has any question or if I could clarify any point for us about what is bringing us together to engage in this process. Okay, everyone is comfortable. We will go ahead. So here we are at the beginning of an 8-month journey to engage with this process that we call the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. And as you may already know, if you received the full outline of the program, we will have a series of live online gatherings just like this one that will provide important orientation and information and help to facilitate our shared engagement and preparation for the conference in July. And so, as you can see there, we've already completed the first of them, as well, we will have in a few minutes completed the first of them. And then we will convene again in this same way via Zoom in February, March, May, and June. Then during July, there will be much activity around the HLPF conference in New York. And then we will have one final session together after the conference, and that will be in August. And each of those calls will happen at the same time as today's call. So that is in universal coordinated time. It's 1400 hours to 1600 hours. But of course, that is a different time for all of us, depending on where we are in the world. And I do note that for those of us who live in countries where we have the very strange practice of changing our clocks twice in the year, for us, the time will change, but for the rest of the world, it will stay the same for the whole program. But I will remind us when we come to that time of changing clocks for those of us who do that. Another important part of this journey will also be an invitation to join regional calls. So these, these big ones where everybody from the whole world is coming together, those we refer to as global calls. But we will also have smaller calls where you will be invited to come together only with those who are in your same region of the world. And that will provide opportunity for more personal interaction, a little bit less input, and just an opportunity to really get to know one another and to share insights and challenges that may be unique to your region. And so the few different opportunities for that kind of regional level engagement will be, first of all, you will be invited to try as best you can to participate virtually in something called a regional forum for sustainable development. And these happen every year between the months of February and April. Each global region has its own separate regional forum on sustainable development. And these regional fora are always kind of a part of the preparation process that leads to the high-level political forum, which is to say the global forum for sustainable development. So you can see the dates there for each region. And for some of them, it is easier to participate more virtually than others, but there is always at least some handful, a few sessions that one can join virtually in each of these fora. And I will provide all of the necessary links and details to help you connect with the forum for your own region. But just so you know, these are the dates when the forum will be happening for your own region. So you can just keep that in mind as we go into February, March, and April. We will also organize small calls for those who are just part of this group to meet at 2 different times during our program. The first will be quite soon. We will invite you to a regional call in the month of February, and this will just be an initial way to meet and to greet others from your region and introduce yourselves and get to know each other as we begin this process together. And the second opportunity to come together with those from your region will be late in the month of June, because at that time, you will all have had an opportunity to see a report from your own government, sort of giving a report on their progress toward achieving the SDGs. And so in those regional calls, you will be invited to kind of exchange your initial reactions to what you have seen in those reports from your own countries. And the dates and the times for each of these regional calls will be chosen by you as a group. So I will be sending emails before each of these to help each regional grouping find the best date and time for that group. Another important part of this process will be certain amount of engagement by you between all of these calls. So as I mentioned earlier, after each global call, I will share the recordings of the call, and I will also share the slides that are presented during each call. And I will share those in all 4 languages. And usually, I will also be giving you some instructions on some kind of reflection or a task to complete between calls. And that will be a very important part of how you will actually engage directly with the UN process that is the HLPF. So that in-between call activity is a very important part of this program. So please keep in mind that just coming to these calls is not the only important part, but that the action in between is essential. And if you do happen to be unavailable and you're not able to attend any of our calls, just please keep in mind that you can always return to the recording afterward, and please do so that you don't miss any important information along the way. Then finally, when we arrive in the month of July, it will be time for the conference itself. And while some of you may actually be planning to come to New York for the conference, that is not a necessary component of participation in this program, because it is possible to follow much of the forum totally virtually. And so during those days, you will be encouraged to watch whatever sessions of the forum you can, given the very full and busy lives that you each have. And in particular, you will be very encouraged to watch the presentation that will be made by your country's government during those days. And these presentations are no more than 15 minutes each. So that's something each of us certainly can find the time to do. And they are always recorded. So you do not need to be available at the exact time that your government is reporting. So that's one piece that you should definitely be sure to see if your country is reporting this year. And then there are also, if you want to participate even more, there are many side events or panel discussions that are organized throughout the days of the conference. And so you will have a whole menu of possible virtual events that you can attend. And then there is something of a capstone or a culmination to this process will be that each of you will be asked to participate in a series of webinars that we call the JCoR SDG Lab. And this series is going to happen from the 27th to the 31st of July this year. And these will be 5 interactive Zoom calls, and each one of them will be dedicated to one of the themes or the areas of focus for this year's HLPF. And so those themes are each one of the goals in that group of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They are goal number 6, safe drinking water and sanitation for all. Goal number 7, affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Goal number 9, resilient infrastructure, inclusive and sustainable industrialization and innovation. Goal number 11, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable cities and human settlements. And goal number 17, resources and partnerships to support all the SDGs. And we will talk about the structure and the details of this lab much more as we get closer to the month of July. But just to give you a general picture of this activity that we are building toward together, to participate in this lab, you will be asked to offer some brief remarks or a brief presentation on something like your observations related to that day's goal, that day's SDG, or perhaps a critique of your government's progress in relation to that goal, or a good practice from a ministry of your congregation that contributes to the achievement of that goal. So again, we will discuss that in much more detail later on, but I wanted to give you a sense of the whole journey that we are embarking on together today. But for now, let's focus on just the next steps in that journey, which are first, when you receive the slides and the recordings from today's call, you will get a link to register for our next global call on the 20th of February. So please register for that as soon as you can. And also watch your email box for an invitation to join with the other delegates from your region. And we will be looking to schedule those calls between the 9th and the 23rd of February, but you will decide on the best day as a regional group. And then I will also be sending you again the slides and the video recordings from today's call and some information and reflection questions that you can explore ahead of our global call on the 20th of February. So once again, a lot of information in only a few minutes, but I promise you will have all of this in writing in your mailboxes so you can easily refer back to any details that you need. Are there any questions that anyone would like to raise or any comments before we close our session for today? Yes, Miriam. Thank you. Thanks for being here and starting the journey with us. Yes, Helga.
Thank you, Teresa, so much. So this was really interesting and very, very good to hear what kind of work the UN does and you with the NGO. So my question is, do you know something about the countries who will report on this conference in July?
Do you mean, do we know which ones will report or something more specific about them?
No, I'm asking because I was invited and I'm in Norway, so I think Norway is among them.
Yes, yes, it is. That's correct. So when we put out the invitations for this program, we always try to invite those members of our congregations who are either currently living in a country that will report or who have some significant personal experience from one of the countries that will report. And Norway is one of them. So that is why the invitation came to you. However, I will say for others, I know there may be some people here who are coming from a different country that is not reporting this year. And while the program itself, I think, will be a little bit less interactive for you because there will be certain elements of it that are just more difficult to engage with if you're not coming from a country that is reporting. We do still think there is some valuable information in the program that can be applied kind of beyond this particular UN conference. And so you're also welcome to be here. But I will just for those who might like to confirm, I'm going to put a link in the chat box now where you can see the list of all the countries who will make a presentation at this year's HLPF. And that is a link that will also be shared with you again in the email that follows up from today. So if you don't grab it right in this moment, you will have it in your mail.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Linda. Thank you very much, Sister Linda. I appreciate that. And we'll pass it along to all of our colleagues who are part of the coalition with whom I work here in New York. Yes, Sister Julia.
I would like to thank you for the presentation. It was very coherent with everything that we do and that we have to continue doing. The challenge of religion and politics is really huge, but all of us, we are also politicians, and we must unite religion with the political aspects, non-partisan, with policies of state, with policies that are going to make a difference. So I enjoyed your presentation a lot. Let's continue firmly in this struggle. We have to struggle always. We can never give up.
Amen. Thank you for that. Yes. And in fact, when things are the most difficult, that's when it's the most important to continue. Wonderful. Well, I see no other hands. So just know, again, you will be receiving many materials from me via email. So please watch for that. And I will also be creating a WhatsApp group for this cohort for everyone who has registered. So that will help us because I know many of us look at WhatsApp more often than email. So there we will just send reminders of future meetings. And when there are important new recordings or new slides, we will just send a quick alert in WhatsApp as well as email, just so everyone can stay on the journey and stay engaged together. But for now, I want to thank you all for dedicating precious time to being here. I think, members of this community are maybe among the busiest humans on the planet. And so I know your time is very precious, and I thank you for giving energy to this endeavor. And I really hope that you will find it worthy of your time and that we can all find new ways to contribute to justice and peace as we continue through these next 8 months together and beyond. So see you in email, in WhatsApp, and again on the 20th of February. And thanks very much to our interpreters, Anna, Gabriela, Vivian. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Bye.